Hello.
Hey.
Hello, Victor.
Hey, Ben.
How you doing, Victor?
How are you?
I'm just wonderful, mate. I'm happy to be doing another live stream. It's been a long time, far too long, for a number of reasons. If anyone's been missing us, I think that we were going to get Ahmad Fahmy on, but then a few things have happened along the way. We couldn't get it pinned down. Then me and Victor had a date in, which I think I couldn't do for some child-based reason. I can't remember now. But anyway, here we are, a bit delayed, but we're here with Viktor Grgic. Victor, you were one of the early interviews I did on the podcast a long time ago.
Yeah, that's been a pretty long time ago.
It was.
I think more than 1 year or something like that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, there would be. I mean, the podcast has been going for a while. And yeah, so it must have been over a year ago, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And I can't believe it's taken us a year to get back to this point as well. And we're actually going to be talking about a really awesome topic that I'm very keen on, which is one which I take no credit for, is the divide between product discovery and delivery really that harmful? So before we begin, I'm just looking over here because, as is always the case with a live stream, I always want to make sure it's working, but I've just had confirmation and it's actually working. So there we go.
Okay. Good.
So yes, we are going to be talking about the divide between product discovery and delivery. And is it really that harmful? And this is something which, since I rebranded the podcast, now called Product Agility, this is a topic which is of the utmost importance to me. It's something I spent a long time thinking about. So when you suggested it as a live stream topic, I was very excited. And so that people get to understand the topic, but also, I suppose, Victor, get to know you a little bit. Would you mind giving everyone a short introduction to yourself and then, I suppose, to the topic at hand?
Okay, sure. So I'm originally from Bosnia. I lived in the Netherlands for 20 years and now 10 years in Hong Kong. And in the past 20, 25 years now that I've been working, did all kinds of things, mainly in the area of software development. And now last 14 years, I was just thinking, basically doing less and less like adoptions and seeing many companies and also touching in many of those companies, obviously, the product management side of it. So, so I was looking more always in I would say a holistic manner, meaning that you have to really, when you touch upon product management, but also just general how the product development system is organized, you have to kind of like see exactly all the elements of it in a systemic way in order to understand if you do one thing, what will be effect actually on other things. And now the topic itself. So occasionally I will turn off the microphone because I'm coughing occasionally, and I also have just in between. So I have a nice cup, tea, obviously, because I'm talking to Ben, so British, and the cup is it says, "In scale we trust," which is a fascinating statement. I got this cup from Société Générale when they did a whole agile at scale adoption. They created these cups, so it's kind of interesting.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that message, Victor.
No, me neither. So it's a bit. I don't know what to think of it. Yeah.
But you got a free mug.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have a free mug?
Yes. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, at least something. So what has been happening recent years is that increasing number of companies that I came across got in touch with with a different approach than I usually see. So what you usually see is safe or very traditional or project management approaches, and then you have all kinds of variations of Scrum and so on. But lately, there are more and more companies I come across which organize things in a what they call in a startup way, and so that's coming actually from Silicon Valley, and so meaning that there is in the beginning, there is not much of a methodology or structure or organization of how they do certain things because there is a very few people. But at some point, they decide they need to scale. So they hire a bunch of people, and in order to scale, and now need to figure out how to actually scale. And this scaling, how it goes, is the first concept is a concept of independent teams. So essentially, the idea is that you have all individual teams, and they are supposed to be independent. And each of the teams essentially has a product manager, and typically they also have a product designer, and then sometimes they even have a product owner. That puzzles me really a lot. So in addition to product manager, and then you have a few engineers, and then you have also QA people, and what else do you have? There was an additional one. So this is a common pattern. Now, as audience probably familiar with, the basic idea of most approaches essentially you have a group of people who share the same objective, and you typically don't want some people to be more special than others. So they focus on engaging directly with the customer and figuring out together what is the best for the customer. And so now in this case, how the companies approach that is that they also on a paper say they want actually engineers to talk to customer, but in reality, it really rarely happens, if ever. So the reason why, and what happens, what I observe, and I can give some examples when I just finish explanation. What happens is essentially the pattern is more or less like this. So there is a certain variations, but more or less like this. So essentially, there is a management, top management of the company startup, which has an idea of what they want to do, and they are basically in charge. They are the actual decision makers because they are the owners and etc. And so product managers can suggest, essentially, they suggest to do certain things, but the decision is not in a product management hands; it's in a C-level hands. Mm-hmm. So now dynamic is immediately is that you have a product manager who needs to go to the C-level, a CEO, to present the idea. Now, C-level immediately says, but did you work out the idea? And so you need to work it out. You can't just present something. So already, the CEO basically wants to have a better working out idea. So the program manager typically starts to work on their own, guarding all kinds of information, etc., etc. And he doesn't want to bother engineers, essentially. Mm-hmm. So after that, CEO C-level might say, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Can you work it out in a design? And oh yeah, by the way, before we get to design, designer says, I need to have a description what you actually want as a product manager. So the product manager then writes a PRD document, a product requirements document. And so it goes to designer. Designer then makes a design based on that. Typically use Figma for that. And they go to the CEO to present design. Now the CEO says, this design is too rough. I need a high definition design to really see properly what it is. So we call this prototyping, they say. Mm-hmm. And so we need to kind of a prototype. And so that has become a repopularized very highly, this prototype idea. And so designer spends quite some time to get this discussed, approved, and so on and so on. And once that's happened, then it goes to the team, the engineers. And it lays out to the engineers. Mm-hmm. Now, you can already basically see a problem here. That engineers, when they get it, basically, they just focus on delivering whatever is being actually thought out. And so it's a very much delivery mode. You could argue, and in these approaches, they say you should involve engineers, but this involvement is generally more on a level, how much does it cost to deliver? So we have this idea, and how much does it cost? And so that's even worse than collaboration. Why? Because the engineers basically are very anxious to give this cost because they don't have the full detail. So this drives even more even from engineers, they say, come back to me when you finish all the details, and then I can tell you how much it's going to cost. And so there's really no collaboration at all, but it looks like there is collaboration because during the process, a senior engineer or the lead engineer is involved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also very common. Each team is pretty large. And so each team has a product manager, designer, lead engineer, and then you have engineers, and then you have testers. And so it tends to be a pretty large team.
Mm-hmm.
So this what I just described, I've seen it in reality, and I literally read it in a book of Marty Kagan,
Mm-hmm.
and inspired. It seems to be a very popular book.
It's got a great name.
Yes, definitely.
I know.
Yeah, and the second book is Empowered, like
I
empowered.
know. I
team.
mean, like,
yeah.
I
Who
know.
doesn't want to have an empowered team? Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of self-help books out there with the same title, but still, I mean, like, brilliant title. Brilliant
Yes.
title.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so what happens, and that's the key thing about what I just told, is if you think about it, you can define agile and opposite of agile in a waterfall, which is very common. But I actually recently like to actually use the sequential development.
Mm.
And so if you think about it, the practices that we constantly tell people are collaborative practices. Now, collaborative practices also tend to be highly parallelized practices, meaning that you, as a whole team, engage in discovering and figuring out exactly what to build, how to build it, and learning through that process. Essentially, it's a much more done together, and then you have iterations. Essentially, whatever the Scrum or whatever it is, doesn't matter. That you go through all those steps together in the shortest possible time in order to learn, to discover what you should be doing next.
Mm-hmm.
So opposite of that is essentially a sequential. Yeah. Now, so where I have seen this? So I've seen this the first time with a Dutch bank. And so in a Dutch bank, this Dutch bank, they have a tendency every few years to get in a very in a hype, basically. Everybody gets into oh, we have this new approach, and that new approach is going to solve our problems. Essentially, that's very common behavior, and some companies have it more than others. In Netherlands, this is quite common pattern that every few they have a problems, and every few years there is a new consultant or a new somebody in organization who is very passionate about the new approach, and everybody kind of jumps on the train, and then this goes for a few years, and then it stops, and there is again a new approach. So this is actually what happened here. First, I was there, and that new approach became less. Okay, everybody got enthusiastic about less. But the problem was we are not really changing the organization. So they're just simply enthusiastic about it. Everybody wants to kind of do it until you say, yeah, but you need to reduce the number of layers in organization. And suddenly there's a much more resistance. They actually don't really want that. And so it's a bit of a cultural thing. So, and nevertheless, after lots of pain and etc., we managed to establish several requirements areas. Also they operated in independent products, but at the end they would become actually a single product because they were not really products. And but what happened at some point? Somebody came with this new shiny thing, and it's called empowered teams. And okay, so we have one requirements area where 7 teams are working together, and they are in early stages. Basically, they are just found out they actually it's kind of a working together with so many teams after lots of disbelief and stuff, and they notice lots of advantages. So they're becoming enthusiastic and everything. And suddenly somebody says, oh, but we have this empowered team that's a way better stuff, or didn't really compare to less at all. They just simply didn't even, the person who introduced it wasn't even aware that we were doing less. They basically at the top said, we need to create one team out of the best people from the existing teams.
Right.
and that's gonna put a product manager, product designer, blah blah blah, and give them really cool stuff to build. Okay. And so they were directly engaging with the customer and everything. It looked really like a startup, etc., within a very complex, large company, basically, very bureaucratic. And so what happened is essentially the trouble started immediately. The other teams felt like we are stuck with all the not cool stuff, and you're giving us implicit message that we suck because the best people are taken out. And that cool team, they were basically working front part of the stack, basically what they're having. It's a bank. You can, if you know, in a bank, you know, there's a lots of applications going all the way down until reporting. So it's a very complex always. So what they did is they took nicely the front part, and they doing this in freedom by simply completely disregarding the backend, which is very legacy and very difficult to deal with. You cannot just deliver fast, etc. So for the management, it looked like they're delivering really fast, and in reality, you're creating a massive systemic problem. And so you can kind of already predict what happened. 2 years later, the whole idea is gone. Okay, so that's that. Now, second company, crypto world. It's a really crypto company. So that's a very much yeah. So that one essentially the way they were set up was as I just described, army of product managers, and all those product managers they try to be independent, they try to be entrepreneurs, etc. And in reality, it was exactly as I described, basically CEO calling the shots. And because of the whole process, how this plays out, and approval process. So before you can build anything, the high definition design needs to be approved. So it became highly sequential, essentially. So the engineers were not involved in the process at all. They're just purely focusing on execution. And so this led to a situation that many product managers were unsatisfied because they've been told they have some kind of a power in saying how to do certain things. And but in reality, it's the basically C-level that decides. And this is something, Ben, the most common what I see is the claim that the product manager in a large complex organization can have the decision-making power to decide to kind of jumpstart a product and decide about it, etc. In reality, I just don't see how it's even possible, let alone that it's actually happening. I just don't see it happening. Simply why? Because those product managers are not really managing a product; they are managing a capability, a feature. And that needs to fit in a bigger picture. There is always somebody on a higher level who's actually calling the shots, whether it's called a CPO or a CEO or whatever it is. So it's in a funny way, what they end up with is something which is somewhat similar to less, meaning that you have a single person who's actually deciding what needs to be delivered.
This is like, okay, like let's pick apart this one. I've been making some notes.
Yeah.
And let's start on that last point, because I think it's really important, and it's something which I think there is a huge range of different contexts in relation to who actually sets the direction for a product and what a senior product person can do. Because I think that there are some people out there who I don't know whether it's naivety or whether it's just not having the experience. I don't know what it is, but there is no right or wrong or absolute answer in regards to a product manager, a product owner, whoever it may be, calls all the shots versus calling very few of them. There's a huge kind of range in between. And even when you look at large-scale Scrum, one of the responsibilities of the product owner is to support the organizational strategic direction. So even if an organization has decided that they're going to go into fast food delivery, but the product manager wants to go into crypto, then that product manager, product owner, product person can't then just decide to to spin up a crypto exchange using that software product, even though maybe it's capable of doing it, maybe it isn't. But that isn't supporting the organizational strategic direction. I think when you're working in a startup and you have very, very few people and everyone's playing multiple roles and has many, many responsibilities, then I can totally see how the founder, who is the CEO and the product person and everything in between for a while, is there's very low cycle time, latency on kind of decision and action, because you're driving it and there's just one person calling the shots. But then you get bigger, and we will, as humans, tend to put in layers of abstraction from the act of creation and the people who are then driving the organization. And then you go for funding,
Yes.
and then those senior people, who maybe it's a CPO, maybe it's a CEO, they're making promises. And even in large organizations like large banks, what I'm currently calling the the promise cycle, which is how long are you making promises for into the future? What senior people tend to do is they make promises and say, you will get X by this certain date, and they do it far off into the future. And once that promise has been set, the likelihood of that senior person actually going back and saying, well, no, we're going to change my promise or something's changed, is normally quite slim. And so, as a product person, you're working within those boundaries of what that larger person has promised, or what someone's promised your investors.
Yes, that's absolutely. Totally agree, and I totally also see that. So it's definitely not it cannot be black white. So you cannot have like a full freedom product managers going their own way. So the whole premise sometimes being said, we have independent teams. In reality, this is never really true. Just in larger companies, are not possible. You're always confined within a certain context and objective being given, etc. The difference is how low level it becomes, and so there is a huge difference in between. I mean, there is always, you're right, on the C level, where they give a strategy, like in less. The typically C level is providing a strategy. And in the strategy, they might even have some ideas of what to actually deliver. But generally, if they have a good relationship with the product owners, they leave up to the product owner to actually decide, is it a good idea for the purpose of the strategy to deliver a certain feature or certain capability or certain outcome of the product. So how the product should be positioned, etc. So in this case, what happens is simply the law of numbers. If you have lots of product managers, what immediate consequence is, my claim is that the ability of product manager to be actually product manager gets diluted enormously.
Yeah,
and so that's the same problem with the product owners. If you have many product owners, none of them is actually product owner.
No,
and
well, it depends on what you want to see as a product. I think this is where the Safe has done a great job at creating. I say, you mentioned Marty Kagan's books, as Creative the Divide. I think that some of this divide is very similar to what we experienced many years ago, and for a long last 20 years, which is where people have always tried to put something in between the teams who are creating the thing and the people that are making the decisions. And when the Agile Manifesto said business people and developers should work together on a daily basis, I think that is a really impactful statement that, one, means very little to many people because it just doesn't seem feasible, and two, should be taken as a sentiment and actually scratch the surface not a little bit. Because we're not saying that teams should work with business people every day, because then we've just spent the last 20 years saying they should talk to customers and users. It makes no sense. And then when people, and I had someone in my podcast, brilliant person, a guy called Fred Fowler, and I think you maybe saw this episode as well. And we had a conversation around product owner, is it a business person, etc. Should they be in between the teams and the rest of it? I think that product owners, particularly over time, have been seen as, if you label them as like the business for whatever reason, and then you can tick that off in the Agile Manifesto, and that just wasn't the sentiment. It isn't about putting a single point between the teams and the market and the customers and users. It was always supposed to be something different. So what we're seeing with I suppose senior people in those examples that you've explained earlier asking for more high definition designs so that they can sign off and say, yes, I want that. It was no different to in large banks I used to work, there was always a change function. Well, not always, often there was a change function. And the change function's job was to talk to the business, and figure out what they want and write a requirements document. And then that would get signed off and they'd be handed over to tech. It's just the same, it's the same pattern of behavior, but maybe it's a little bit less shit because at least it's not purely something written anymore. At least it's something which has an element of kind of customer or user centric design put into it.
Yeah. So the regarding that is yes. So I mean, again, basically, what you describe is again what's part of the principles, agile principles, seem like a really far fetched, especially in the large organizations. So what I noticed for the past many years, there is a kind of like a two way of reasoning that I see. Two different. You can group people, all people, in two groups. And so
and last, Victor, you've come up with the answer.
Yeah, obviously not, but let's oversimplify now for a sec.
Yeah.
So just to kind of get the point is when agile principles do not become possible, what happens is that the people then say, you know what, agile doesn't work in large organizations. It's meant for small teams, small things, etc. So as soon as you end up in a scale, so it just cannot work basically, and now three groups. So second group basically says we need to compromise. So at least let's make it a little bit less shitty, basically. And so that's basically what you also describe is if we can make it a little bit better, and so or much better. It's always relative to what exactly, etc. So. And then in the third group, which I kind of like partly less also goes for, it basically says, yes, we know it's really hard, and so therefore we need to be extremely patient, but it's really important to go in the direction. Whether you're ever going to be able to achieve that the developers talk to the user in a very complex product, lots of people, it doesn't matter at the end. What matters is that you're constantly improving the direction. So the last thing what you want to do is putting practices in place which prevent that from happening. And that's a difference. And that's also then to connect to what I just explained regarding how this whole intention behind these practices of a product manager, designer, blah blah blah, and having lots of the product managers, and how this all plays out. So what happens is that it becomes much more sequential. But intention is basically to make it less sequential. Basically, if you listen to any of the product management gurus, they all say we should be way collaborative. We should actually, developers should engage together with the product manager, designer to work together, etc. But the problem is the structure itself, with the creation of so many roles, creates automatically a distance. And also because of the structure, it also triggers the behavior of the C-level, which demands all kinds of things, because there are so many of the product managers. So this is a very systemic effect, which is a bit difficult to explain in the words, but these systemic effects are real, and that's what I really observe. But you could say the most important argument and most important problem here, at the end, whether it's agile or not agile or product development, everybody says we need to have a short cycle from which we learn. So that's clearly a message from product management community. And so we want to really be able to learn. So we want to have a structure. We want to have a setup where we learn from. Now, as soon as it becomes more sequential, the learning becomes impeded really fast. And so the most obvious problem with what happens is if a designer designs something and it goes to the engineer, and his designer spends a lots of time to design, goes to the engineer, says, so can you build it? There's already a bit of a problem, because as a developer, you might see problems with the design, but you have you're kind of like with a with an issue, what do you do about it? Do I make a fuss out of it? We waste even more time, and or do I just simply say, never mind, I'm just gonna do it, try to build it, And I see this. Mostly they go for the second one, and if they go for the first one, they get labeled as an annoying engineer who questions everything. I mean, they are smart people, designers who know what they are doing. So why the heck do you need to have your ideas about it? Yeah.
But
So
is it not, I
this.
suppose, like overkill? I play devil's advocate on this one.
Mm.
I suppose that overkill in so much that everybody can't be involved in every conversation. Otherwise, like we wouldn't get much done. And what we're not talking about is like, this is not kind of soft product creation team like fear of missing out.
Mm.
And this isn't the product people like just saying like I can like what I know is that like, feasibility of what we're looking to create doesn't matter, because they absolutely wouldn't say that, because the feasibility of what we're trying to create would matter. Right, so if it can't be about no one being involved in that in the earlier stuff, which is going to be kind of feeding into something you're going to create, and it isn't about everyone being involved in all those conversations all the time at the beginning, like what are good balances, right, that can be made
Sure.
then between that?
Yeah. So that's a good point. Also, in less adoptions, I rarely see that everybody is involved in discussions in refinement with the stakeholders. Even in a really great teams, what happens is that the more senior people are the one driving discussion, and the more junior people are, in the best case, listening, and sometimes also not present, because discussion happens at the workplace of the user. So that's depending on the context, this can happen. And this is a really good less adoption, etc. So absolutely right about it. So that argument, I don't say everybody needs to be involved in everything. It's more how it happens. This sequentiality is that simply from idea to cache time becomes long when you do sequential development. It's just a queuing theory, and so it's the way it's being done much more important. And because it's the way it's being done, from idea to cache takes longer, and the feedback loop gets broken. So there's a less opportunity to rectify, to learn, basically. So that's more actually, not necessarily that everybody needs to be involved all the time.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. The idea to cache is a classic, right? And who doesn't who doesn't love an idea? And who doesn't love a bit of cache? Well, some people. Like I like a bit of idea. I like ideas. I like cache. And so like, the shorter time you can get with that is important. But it reminds me of a conversation I was having with a gentleman called Cliff Hazel on the podcast a little while ago. Cliff was one of these. The clickbait title for Cliff is ex Spotify. I was like, oh my God, he was at Spotify. I've got to listen to this. But he's also the co-creator of Flight Levels, or co-founder of Flight Levels. Actually, me and Cliff are going to be doing a few things together, I think, in the next few months. And we were talking about the power of quitting. And I think the one thing you don't hear much about is actually shortening the time between idea and abandonment, because sometimes it's never going to result in cash, And I wonder if some of the great product techniques that are out there, actually we bring some people with a different skill set into the conversations earlier. Actually, we can abandon crappy ideas that won't be able to be implemented or just won't work earlier, because we're getting the feedback from a different, broader perspective. And I think that's kind of missed. And I think that the one thing that I've always, not always, I seem to consistently observe is that there are, when you get people from the product world who understand a lot of the new, old, refined product techniques and approaches, and you add in people from the creation side of things, actually there's a huge amount that you get more value from those techniques. But at the same time, there's a huge number of different ways of thinking and methods out there which have been present in the agile world for a long time that are kind of sit quite nicely in this intersection. between kind of the product world and agility, and they're too often just seen as kind of agile things rather than kind of product things, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I mean,
Yes.
I know one which you raised a good point out on LinkedIn actually a little while ago, user story mapping. It definitely can create the trap where people think, oh, we've defined everything now, and this must be all of it, and we just have to work through that, which is wrong. Right? It's like with many things, you do the minimum amount possible. But when you get people together and you get someone from the product world who hasn't heard of it or has always dismissed it as an agile thing, and actually you take people through it, but like, actually, which is actually really useful.
Yes.
It does engage everyone in the conversation.
Yeah, so absolutely agree. So that's completely, because I also notice in agile community there's a lots of these kind of like statements being made in a generic sense, but when you look at the reality, there is too much too much theory and too little that they actually know how to do product management properly. And so that's absolutely needed, and that's very much welcome from product management. And I myself learn really a lot, and in exploring and knowing these kind of techniques, and also in coaching and training, I encourage typically people on a product owner and product management side to learn much more about these techniques and these approaches, and because that's clearly lacking, and so. Definitely. That's absolutely that's something missing. Let me take an example. So user story mapping. So it's actually a really good example because um, there is a theory of user story mapping, and then there is a reality of what I see really a lot. In reality, how it's being done is basically as a project management tool. And so they lay out exactly more or less, as you say, all the stories, and everybody loves it, the user story mapping, because now we see the full picture of what we're going to build. No, that's not what it's intended for. And because they see it, it feels like a control thing, and now we just need to deliver this, and there's no learning, there's nothing.
No.
And so sometimes I say, if your user story map is not changing every sprint, something is clearly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
But at the same time,
so,
the technique of user story mapping, I think this is where the things get confused. I've made this up in my head, by the way. I don't know if this is true, but I always think that people get confused between the artifact and the process. And I think
yeah.
that the process of user story mapping actually, sitting down with a collection of people who are involved in product creation and product and the users or the customers or stakeholders or the closest you can get to them, and saying, right, so in this instance, this person's going to be using the product. So let's actually put ourselves in their shoes, or you tell me how you want to use it. Let's work together to increase our shared understanding of why we're doing it and what we could possibly create. And we'll end up with some stuff at the end of it, which can absolutely help us guide our way through. But that isn't the really valuable part. Isn't what we end up with, because that's going to change anyway. But it's that new shared customer centric kind of walking a mile in their shoes type attitude that we gain from going through the process, which is one of the reasons why I have always really enjoyed it, because there are very few techniques out there in the agile world, I think, that really put the actual user story front and center, not just sort of crappy little backlog items or as a I won't say that or something else. Actually the actual story of the user going through and changing their behavior and getting value from something we are looking to create.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's very much welcome, very absolutely welcomed. So my main critique is not definitely not about that. It's a more the lack of thought out complete systemic effects of a certain practices, and which come along with those really good practices, and such as army of product managements everywhere, independent teams and designers everywhere, and all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you. So, Victor, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I said that we would try and keep this to around 45 minutes. So we've got about 6 minutes or so left. I'm just looking to my left here and looking at the title of what we come up with originally. And the question was, is a divide between product discovery and delivery really that harmful? And I suppose, given the conversations and what we've shared, if you were going to answer that question with a yes or a no and a brief explanation, how would you answer it?
Yeah, so based on what I just described, without actually mentioning yet that title, let me now connect to the title. The answer is yes, it's harmful. At which level is not harmful? At the level that you just simply, in an abstract sense, talk about, yeah, there is a discovery part and there is a delivery part of what we are doing, but it's a one thing what we are doing. There is no big deal if you would leave it by just simply some abstract language thing. The problem is, in reality, it's not abstract language thing; it's actual divide, and in different degrees of harmfulness. And so, a very common one and quite harmful is literally different people are doing discovery, and different people are doing delivery.
Mhm.
And so, because of not because people want that, but because simply lack of systemic view on the whole system of product development, which includes product management. And so it's harmful because it reduces the sequential development and is not needed. It's really not needed. So does it mean that you all the time in every situation can combine completely discovery and delivery? No. Even in all really good less adoptions, there is some part of it always, which is kind of a separate when it comes to discovery. So there is some people at the top or whatever you want to call them thinking about the next feature and they're spending time doing that. That's basically discovery, and they are applying all kinds of ways to do that. But you want to actively work on reducing this time and this barrier and involve the team as soon as possible. And then thinking about techniques to really and to involve the teams, and also think about the structural organizational things which are blocking you from involving the teams. And which is also core part of also self-management. If you really want team to self-manage, they have to really understand things from the overall whole product focus, which involves discovery. And so yeah, that's basically the argument.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree. I'd say that a very clear divide between discovery and delivery, like, so is it really that harmful? Like, well, yes, it often is harmful because it just causes pain and anguish. And if nothing else, if I take like if I say I add to what you said, I think that people that are actually creating software can gain a huge amount from getting empathy and greater understanding for the people that they're delivering it for. To your point, with that understanding, they can make better decisions, and their empowerment means a little bit more to them. I think there's teams who can actually get the opportunity to give something and see the person that's receiving the thing that they've created. You get quite a buzz from that. And I think it's for me, the big takeaway for me is just going back to that age old classic that I mentioned, where people are saying, does it have to be everyone, or is it all or nothing? I think that breaking down the barriers, breaking down the divide, taking a much more systemic understanding or systemic view of the whole act of kind of product discovery, creation, and being able to adapt that product when necessary, hopefully will mean that people see the value in getting more people in earlier so that they can decrease their idea to cash or their idea to abandonment time, so that you can have more agile products overall. So yeah, I think the divide is maybe at times it's how can it ever be an artificial one? But there was somebody once said to me that organizations would always create silos. It's always going to be the way. It's just a case of how we can build relationships between them and communicate clearly is what's going to make the difference. And I think this is the clincher then for me, is actually how can product and how can the technology, the product creation side of things actually build relationships and say, well, let's begin to experiment and move forward towards getting customers and users closer to the teams because we really see it's beneficial, not just because someone's saying that we should.
Exactly. And I've seen firsthand from both sides, engineers getting really inspired by getting involved, and also other way around, getting really frustrated but not being involved. And so obviously there's also lots of developers who are thinking, I'm just gonna stare at my black screen with IntelliJ or Eclipse or whatever it is, and leave me alone. I don't want to deal with the customer. That you have that also. But we are living in 2023. where the job of staring at a code is going to be automated for a big part, talking about ChatGPT and stuff. And so you really want to shift that into being a more product developer, which means engaging with the customer.
And I say on the flip side of that, as a product person, I don't think you'll get very far if all you want to do is work alone.
Correct. And that's increasingly more impossible. And,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Viktor, thank you very much for coming on. I've enjoyed it. The time's really gone quickly. And so I think that maybe we'll have to find some more time to talk another time when your cough is better and you don't have to spend your time being so on it. You've done an amazing job though. Yeah. And you're awesome mug. So Viktor, thank you very much for coming on. This live stream will be on LinkedIn and YouTube now forever.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
coming on. I appreciate it very much.
Mate, we'll arrange it again. We'll do another one. Maybe get some more people involved. And thank everyone for listening and watching. And we'll be back again next month with something which I'm yet to decide. But thank you very much.